Hi, so we're going to talk a little bit about arrays. So arrays are a container object that holds a fixed number of values of a single type. Okay, the length of array is established when the array is created. After creation, this length is fixed. You've seen an example of arrays already in the main method of World application. This section discusses arrays in greater detail. So this is the array documentation from Oracle. Okay, so in its simplest form, an array is a list. So an array has so as a list, you can see this kind of this graphic right here. So we have our first index is 0, and then we go up sequentially for index values. So an index means the number of the element within the array. Okay, so if you can imagine, an array is just a list. Okay, and but the arrays can have multiple dimensions that we'll talk about later. Okay, so an array with one dimension is essentially a list. You also hear it referred to as a vector. Probably not now, but you might hear about it referred to as a vector. So that's basically a one-dimensional array. It's just a list of values. A two-dimensional array is going to be more like a spreadsheet. Okay, so we take a spreadsheet. You can imagine that a one-dimensional array is like just column A, right? So it has like values in each of these rows. Obviously, a spreadsheet starts from 1, not 0, but and then a two-dimensional array, each row is its own array. So if you look at this spreadsheet, row 1 is a list, row 2 is a list, or row 2, is an array. Okay, so row 1 would be a one-dimensional array, row 2 is a one-dimensional array, row 3 is a one-dimensional array. Okay, so when we initialize an array, a one-dimensional array is just like a list. It's like one column of a spreadsheet. Okay, a multi-dimensional array is like an actual, just a regular spreadsheet. A three-dimensional array would be more like a cube. And then a four-dimensional array, we can't really, it's interesting, humans don't really think outside of 3 dimensions, but you could have a four-dimensional array. It's just a little bit harder but you can have any number dimension array, but they're just a little bit harder to visualize. So we're mainly going to be talking about one-dimensional and two-dimensional arrays, mainly because of the fact that one-dimensional arrays are great for listing and looping through data. Okay, a lot of times we'll use a one-dimensional array just to loop through data. Two-dimensional arrays are great because of the fact that a lot of data is stored as two-dimensional arrays. So anytime you see like a CSV file or a spreadsheet or a database table, essentially what that is a two-dimensional array. Okay, and there's lots of different ways to store data, but the array is kind of the I don't know, not the Swiss Army knife, but it's a widely used and simple way to store data. Okay. So we have one-dimensional arrays and two-dimensional arrays. All right, so each item in an array is called an element. Each element is accessed by its numerical index as shown in the preceding illustration. So for example, if this was a list of integers, okay, so let's give an example here. Let's take a look at this code. So first we're going to, we have our class declaration, we have our method declaration, right? We have our main method, public static void main, strings args, okay? String args. And then this is how you declare an array, right? So we have just an int, and then followed by open and close brackets. And an array is the name of the array. This can be any name. Okay, so when we're declaring an array, that's what we're doing. All right. So basically, what we did here is we declared the array, and then we allocate memory for 10 integers, right? Okay. And then we initialize the first element. That means that we put data into it. Okay, so we create this array. It has 10 empty slots, right? Okay, 0 to 9 in this case, right? So there are 10 empty locations. We can then fill those with numbers. So we then would fill them with numbers. Notice that each one of these is essentially an integer variable. All right, an int variable. So if you can imagine an int array, right, is an array of integers, or it's more like a list of integers, right? And we can then refer to this integer here as an array 0, right? So that's the first element of the array. It has to be an integer because this is an array of integers, right? That's how we defined it, and it has 10 locations, right? Okay, so we are going to go ahead, so these are arrays, right? So they go ahead and they print them out. They have a statement, a print statement for each element in the array. Okay, so the preceding program declares an array named AnArray with the following line of code. Okay, so that int open bracket, close bracket, AnArray. This declares array with the name, an integer array with the name AnArray. Okay. Like declarations of other variables, an array declaration has two components: the array's type and the array's name. The array's type is written as type open bracket, close bracket, where type is the data type of the contained elements. Okay, the brackets are special symbols indicating the variable holds an array. The size of the array is not part of its type, which is why the brackets are empty. An array's name can be anything you want, provided that it follows the rules and conventions previously discussed in the naming section. Okay? In general, notice that we use camel case, right? So the first letter is lowercase, the second word is uppercase, and then each word of your variable name is uppercase. So, as with variables of other types, the declaration does not actually create an array. It simply tells the compiler that this variable will hold an array of a specified type. Okay? So you're defining the variable, and then you're going to put an array in that variable. Okay. Similarly, you can declare arrays of other types. So you have to know, using these types of arrays, you have to know what types of variables are going to go into your array, right? Okay, so you can have the primitive variable types, right? And those have lowercase first letters, right? So we have byte, short, long, float, double, boolean, and char. Okay, or you can have a string, and those are string objects, right? You can also place the brackets after the array's name. Okay, so you can say float an array like this, but this is discouraged, right? So we want to if we wanted an array of floats, we'd have an array like this. Array of doubles, we'd write like this, and then we'd have the name of the array. Okay, one way to create an array is with a new operator. The next statement in the array demo program allows an array with enough memory for 10 integer elements and assigns the array to an array variable. Okay, so we name our variable an array. We already declared it up here, right? And then we're going to actually create the new array and put it in the variable. Right? So new int 10, right? If this statement is missing, the compiler prints an error like the following and compilation fails. Variable an array may not have been initialized. Okay, so to initialize means to put something into the variable for the first time. Okay, and then we go ahead and we can initialize each element and so forth. Okay. Alternatively, you can use the shortcut syntax to create an initializer array. Right, now we saw this in the previous video, right? So we can say, oh, I know what my values are, so I can say, oh, it's an integer array called an array, and load this list of values, right? So it's a curly braces, and it's a comma delimited list. Right? Delimited means comma is used to separate the elements or the items in the list. Here the length of the array is determined by the number of values provided between the braces and separated by commas. You can also declare an array of arrays, also known as a multidimensional array, by using 2 or more sets of brackets, such as string and then bracket bracket. Okay, so in this case, you have each of these, each value in the first array here would also contain a set of elements, which would be its own array. So in this, and we'll go into this in just a second. Okay. So in the Java programming language, a multi-dimensional array is an array whose components are themselves arrays. This is unlike arrays in C or Fortran. The consequence of this is that rows are allowed to vary in length, as shown in the multi-dimensional array demo program. Okay, so this is what they're saying, right? Okay, so what they're saying by making that statement is that if we have this this multi-dimensional array, right? So we have a 2-dimensional array, all right? So this is the first element. Notice that when we have our class declaration, we have our method declaration, and then we have, this is where we create our multi-dimensional array, all right? So there are 2 elements here. Okay, so in here, this names array, the names array has 2 elements. Okay, this is the first element, right, between the curly braces. This is the second element. Okay, so notice that the first element, so we have outside curly braces that defines the whole thing, and then each of the first level array are between curly braces here, a comma, and then the second element. Okay, so this first array here has 2 elements, 0 and 1. Okay, now array 0, that's this, has 3 elements, Mr., Mrs., and Ms. Okay, so this array, the names array, element 0 has elements, that's element 0, right? So that's this, has elements 0, 1, and 2. Okay? And we can, and then array, and then names, and then the so that's that 0 element. Element 1, that's element 1 here of the names array, has 2 elements. It's 2 sub-elements, right? So that's, so if names, if this is the first element, or sorry, it's the second element, but element 1 here, this would have elements 0 and 1. Okay, so we see that down here. So if we said system print line out, name 0, name 0, 0 plus names 1, 0. Okay, so names 0, 0, that's referring to this element, so that's the first element, and the 0, sorry, I always say first and second, but really 0 and 1. So the 0 element is this element, right? And then inside that, the 0 element is here, so that's Mr. So by this names 0, 0 refers to the 0 first level element and the 0 second level element, right? And then names 1, 0 refers to the 1 element 1, and it refers to the 0 element in element 1. So it refers to Mr. This is Mr. and this is Smith. Right? So we can add those, we can concatenate those together by using the plus sign. So we just put the 2 strings together and we get Mr. Smith. Okay, notice that we have spaces inside of our strings. That's something that could be confusing. Okay, so that's basically where we're going to stop for now. Okay, now we can go into copying arrays. So anytime you're going to sort data, or you're going to copy data from one thing to another, you end up doing a lot of copying from one array to another, because you might take in some raw data. That's an array, but you're going to use like an if statement or some kind of logic to sort it into another array, or to do some kind of computation on the numbers in the array. So copying from one array to another, really, we will do quite a bit of that, right? Okay, and then they go into a little bit of more array manipulation down here. Okay, but that's the basis for arrays. Okay, so essentially they're lists and lists of lists is kind of how you can look at them. Okay. All right, so let's write a little bit of code here. So we're actually going to create a new, so we're going to go File, whoops, and go to our Hello package. We're going to go New, Class, and we're going to call it Array Loop. Okay, we're going to call it Array Loop, right? Now we haven't talked about loops yet, but we will in just a second. Okay. Oh my gosh, and I forgot to put my public static void. Let's see if I can write it, and you should try this too. Did I do it right? Oops, I wrote in my thing for me. Okay, let's see if I got it right. Oh, I did. Look at that. Okay, so we got an array loop here. Okay, so we are going to have an array of strings. Okay, so we're going to put string. Okay, and that's our array. And I'm going to call it favorite people. Okay. Okay, so we defined our string array of favorite people. Okay, and now we're going to put favorite people is a new string array. And we're going to say that we're going to put 10 strings in our string array. Okay, so that's our string array here. Now, we can load this in here in a couple of different ways, right? So we have a new string array. We could say that favorite people, okay, and we can put, okay, so we have element 0, and my first favorite person is Mike. Okay, and the way that I like to do this, and you can do it differently, is I copy from the equal sign up to the next line, and that Control C, and then I can go, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, I highlight Shift Tab to move things back, to line them back up, and then I go back in and do my numbers, right? Now, would you ever do this like this? Would you ever actually load these into a list like this? Absolutely not. You would never do this, except the one time that you're learning. Otherwise, we'd use that list constructor, right? Okay. My favorite people is okay, so I have I've created my array here, okay? we have system out println. I'm just going to print the array out. So let's go ahead and run that. Oops. Okay, so we're going to print out the first. We're going to go ahead and print out the first element of that array. Okay, favorite people is Mike. Okay, I know it doesn't make any sense at this point. Okay, so favorite people are Mike, so we printed out the first element of that array, right? Okay, so we've printed out one element of our favorite people array. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, excuse me, we're going to take a look at a different way to create this array. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to define a different array. Call it some people. And notice that some people, so it's a string array, and we're going to go ahead and use some of the same names here. We have this array, right? Okay. And then we could print it out. If we wanted to print the whole thing out, we could print some people, and then we can use the toString method. Okay, so this is going to be using what's called dot notation. So basically, this the string array has this method called toString, right? And we can get some code help here. If we hit period, it's going to give us these options, right? Okay, one of them is toString. Okay. So this is kind of the second and more easy way to create a array. So we're saying a string array called some people, and we're going to feed it this list of names, right? Okay, so it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's going to create an 8-element array with the indexes 0 to 7. That's interesting. I really thought that would work. Okay, so my mistake. So it's going to be what we're going to do to print out this array is we're going to get a new string, and then we're going to put in. So we're basically going to make a string constructor, right? And we're going to feed it some people. Okay, so according to documentation, this should work. I will research and get back to you. So we're going to go ahead and kind of table this for now. So, but we have two arrays of strings here. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at loops. Okay. So these are the two kind of primitive, not primitive, but the two basic array. Two basic arrays. Now it could have been ints, it could have been doubles, but in our case it was strings. Okay. All right, so let's take a loop at loops. And there are a couple of different types of loops. Okay, the first that we're going to see here is that we're going to see just a basic while loop. Okay, so let's put int, and we're going to put count is equal to 0. Okay, so we initialize, we declare and initialize an integer called count, and then we're going to say while, we're going to have a condition, while, and notice that I like to put in the structure of things before I go. So especially when you're first learning the program, putting in this structure first. So we have the while keyword, we have the parentheses, and we have an open close curly brace. Okay, so we're going to have this out while count is less than 8. Okay, and then we're going to do something inside the while loop. So in this case, we're going to do our same print line, but instead of putting 0 in here, we're actually going to use count. Okay, so we're going to put, instead of our 0, we're going to put count in there, and then we're going to increment the counter. Okay, so to increment the counter means to add 1. Now we could do count equals count plus 1. That's one way to do it. We could do count equals count plus 2. The easiest way to do it is to put this symbol plus plus. Okay, and of course we have to have our semicolon. All right, so that's our first kind of simple loop here. Now there are some dangers to this. So for example, if I put, if I didn't remember to increment count, of course count would never go above, would never get to 8. So that's a problem. Okay. Also, if I put count is less than 8, if I put it like, so they're 9 here, right? What if I put count? So let's just go ahead and run it, and we'll do a couple of experiments here. Okay, so I ran it, and our output was kind of as expected, right? Okay, let's go ahead and delete this first print line function here, so we're pretty clear. Okay, so we go ahead and print. So what happened here is we have our favorite people array. We declare our counter. We put our while loop in. We say, okay, loop this line of code while the count is less than 8. So what happens here is that the code executes line by line, right? It goes 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So at 24 it says, oh, this is a while loop. Okay, so while count is less than 8, I'm going to continue. Okay, so on line 24 it asks the question, is count less than 8? The answer comes back true. The count is less than 8. It's 0. Okay, so it goes, okay, so execute everything inside the while loop. So it executes line 25. It prints out, whatever our favorite people element 0, right? Then it increments count. So now count is 1. It gets to this curly brace and it goes back up to the top to line 24. It says, oh, I should do this line of code while the count is less than 8. The count is equal to 1, 1 is less than 8, so it's true. So I'm going to execute this code. So it executes everything, 25, 26. Remember, count's now 2. It comes back up here, it checks count. So what happens is it loops back to the top. It only checks when it hits line 24. Okay, so it doesn't do any checking inside here. If this condition is true, it just executes everything inside the while loop, and then comes back up and checks. Okay, so that's our first type of loop. Okay. Now we can do another variant of this. Okay, so the next one is the do while. Okay, so the next loop is a do. We put do. Okay, and then we actually take our condition and we put it after the loop. Okay, so we put do while count is less than 8. Okay. So notice that instead of, I'm going to use the same counter, I'm just going to reset it. Okay, so notice I'm not going to declare it again, so I'm not going to put into count, I'm just going to say count, I'm going to reset it to 0. Okay. Alright, so now I go ahead, okay, And I'm going to go ahead and just kind of print out some lines here. I'm going to copy this line. I'm going to say, oh, this is our. So I'm just going to say, oh, this is our while loop, and this is our do while loop. Okay, I'm going to add the new line key. I'm going to add this new line code, right? This is /n. Oops. \n. Let's do it before that. Notice how we get this, when we use this \n, we get this line break right here. So let's go ahead and let's put it before. Okay, we're gonna run it. Okay, so we have our while loop. Basically it prints out favorite people and then whatever the element is, right? So it loops 8 times, so we get as expected. Notice we get Mike, Sally, Terrence, Jim, Juan, Joan, June, Jane, right? So June is the last one, right? So why did it only get to 7? Okay, that's the question. Why did it only get to 7? Okay, it happened both times, right? Okay, so in this case, as soon as this gets to 7, this is still true, right? This condition is true. But as soon as it gets to 8, it doesn't actually do when count is equal to 8, it doesn't actually loop, right? Because this test is false. Okay. What if I made it less than or equal to? Okay, how about less than or equal to? Let's run it again. Okay, and notice we get that additional element, right? So now it goes to 8, it goes to J. Okay, so that's our while loop and our do while loop, right? Okay, so remember, no matter, this condition is Boolean, right? So this is always going to come down to true or false. No matter how complicated this section is right here, this while condition, it's always going to come down to true or false, okay? The next one is a bit more complicated, so let's look at the syntax. Okay, we covered while, we covered do while, right? Okay, the next one is a for statement, okay? Okay, now at its simplest, this is the syntax for it. Well, not the syntax, but so let's go ahead and let's put our count back to 0. Okay, and we're gonna now do a for loop. Okay, so this is our for loop. Okay, our count's gonna be at 0. Okay, we're gonna say, oh, this is our for loop. So let's go ahead and we're gonna print out our label for it in our output. So this is our for loop. Okay, so here's our for loop. Oops. Okay, so now in a for loop, what you're going to do is instead of using, so notice I used count. Now I could put count equals to 1 right here and just use count. The traditional is using I for increment. Okay, so in a for loop, what we usually do is that we define a variable inside the condition statement for the for loop. Okay, so we define our counter, which is I. We set it equal to 1. Okay, in this case I'm going to set it equal to 0. Okay, we say this is our condition and this is our increment, right? Okay, so in this case we want it less than or equal to 8. Okay, so we have our counter, right? We have our increment, the variable we're going to use to count. We have our condition. We're going to say, well, we want to loop until I is less than or equal to 8. And then we have our increment, I++. Okay, so we could do something like we can increment by 2s, we can increment by 3s. In this case, we're going to increment by 1. That's what the plus means. Okay, that means we're going to add 1 to I every time. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and put in our statement, right? So we're just going to print out a line. So we're just printing out a line. Really what we're using that I for, we're using it as a counter, and we're using it as a way to choose which element in favorite people that we're going to print out. Okay, so let's go ahead and run it again. Okay, so the same result occurs. So we have our for loop, right? Okay. Okay, now these all are fine. All right, these all are great ways to loop. Okay, it's just fine. We're using a number we end up having, to count every time. We end up having to reference the original array every time. Okay, and it's fine. Okay, but there are a couple of things that are not good about it. Okay, one is that we have to declare an additional variable. We have to keep count. We have to keep track of these variables we're using to increment, which makes our code a little bit more complicated, right? We also have to remember to reset these or declare them. Okay, so we can also get into situations where if we don't increment right, we can have errors like the one we're going to do now. Okay, so let's say we had I is less than or equal to not 8, but let's say we said 11. Okay, now what's going to happen here? We have what would be 12 elements in favorite people from 0 to 11. Well, no, we have 10 elements, right? We have from 0 to 9. So at some point, it's going to try, what this code is going to try to do is it's going to try to call favorite people element 11. And let's see what happens when that occurs. Okay, so this is the error we get. Okay, so basically what we did here is we said, okay, we're going to use this variable I to increment. We're going to keep going until I is less than or equal to 11 and increment I by 1 each time. Okay, so what happened is that we got this Java-lang array index out of bounds exception here, okay, and it said 10, right? Okay, so as soon as it got to 10, as soon as I got to 10, right, it went outside of our array and we got that out of bounds exception, okay? So let's change it back to 8. Okay, now, so what is the better way to loop through things like this? Okay, well, the best way to do it is just this. Is this enhanced for statement. And let's take a look. Okay, so for int item in numbers. Okay, so that's what we would increment, or this is how we would increment it. All right. So basically, the syntax for this is, so instead of using a variable to increment, we say, and we're going to put our enhanced for loop, right? Okay, and we're going to say for name in favorite people. Okay, and we have to put a string, right? So we're saying it's a string name in favorite people. Okay. Do something, right? So in this case, instead of referencing the array, it's already referencing it, right? So what we can do is then, instead of actually going back and saying, okay, go and get this element, right, that we're defining as I in this one, or count in this one, basically what this is doing is it's already feeding it into the variable called name. So in each loop, name is different. The name variable is holding each of the strings that are held in favorite people. Okay, so this is the way to do it. Okay, so for, we're saying it's a string called name, and it's an element of favorite people. We're going to loop through every one of the elements of favorite people, and we're going to do something with each of those elements. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. And I'm getting an error here, and I'm not sure why. Okay, so I had a missing curly brace there. Okay, so let's do this last loop here. So we're going to press play. Okay, so we have our enhanced for loop. So notice that it's just looping all the way through. Notice that we don't just go to Jane this time. Okay, so this is the one, right? So in our other loops, we only went up to 8, correct? This time it just goes all the way through and gets JoJo, which is the last one. Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we covered in this video, right? Okay, we talked about how to create an array. Okay, in this case, we created a string array. It could have been any array of anything. Okay, in Java, when we're creating this array, we have to tell it what the array is going to hold. In this case, it's going to hold strings. We also have to tell it how many elements are in the array. Okay, we can do it like this. We can declare it and then add things to the array in this manner. We can also say this array is going to hold strings, it's going to be called some people, and these are the elements. And basically what that tells it is to create an array with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 elements. Okay? And then we went ahead and we looked at some different types of loops. So we have a while loop, we have a do while loop, okay, where do is first and while comes after. We have a for, which has the counter, right? The variable we're going to increment, the condition, and the increment. And then finally, the one that we'd like to use, and this is the enhanced for loop, where we just define a variable that's going to hold each element as we loop through it. Okay, so go ahead and create this sample code, and good luck.